Hello and welcome to Catholic Answers Live. I'm Cy Kellett, your host, and I'm really going to try hard today. Jimmy Akin is our guest. 2 hours with Jimmy Akin, senior apologist here at Catholic Answers, the author of, they gave me a Jimmy Akin stack right next to me, The End Times. I think that's Jimmy's newest 20 Answers book, the beautiful little book, The Words of Eternal Life, True Happiness, and Where to Find It. The Bible is a Catholic book, and many other books. Hello, Jimmy Akin.
Hello, Cyril Kellett. How are you doing?
I'm very well. Do you know why I said I'm really going to try hard today?
I do not. Why?
Okay, so here's the deal. You're like the top professional. And I realize that sometimes,
Okay.
No, really, you are. And so sometimes when you're on, I get a little bit like, Jimmy's got this. And I'm going to be a super top professional myself today. I'm not going to be like,
Okay.
Jimmy's got this. Because, so whenever if I say awkward things or anything, it's just me trying really hard to do a great job today. Okay.
Well, I'm glad you're going to do a great job today. That's awesome.
I'm going to do my best. Our number, should I even give out the number? Every line already full. Did they know? Did they check the calendar? They knew Jimmy was here? 888-318-7884, if it'll do you any good. 888-318-7884. Jimmy, of course, also the proprietor of Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World. What's happening in the mysterious world this week, Jimmy?
Well, this week is a Fifth Friday, so we're going to be having Fifth Friday Weird Questions. We're going to be talking about things like, can you baptize Baby Yoda? Would the Pope be the Bishop of Rome if humans had to leave Earth? And how do you administer sacraments in space? And things like that.
The Baby Yoda is one of my favorite. I love the Baby Yoda question.
People love Baby Yoda, yeah. Coming up next month, we've got some really exciting stuff on Mysterious World 2. We have a two-parter on Nostradamus, the famous psychic or astrologer or something that is very famous and that surprisingly people in the Catholic world take sometimes rather seriously.
Really?
I mean, you'll find books of Catholic prophecy that have chapters on Nostradamus in them where they're taking him and his prophecies seriously. So we're going to be telling you about Nostradamus. We're going to, in our second part, reveal what appears to be his secret technique that he didn't tell anybody about. Then we're going to have a medical mystery that occurred up in Riverside, California, just up the road from us, that partly inspired an X-Files episode. And then at the end of the month, we're going to begin an interview with Paul Smith, who is one of the original U.S. Stargate program government psychic spies.
Oh, cool. May's a good month.
I do a two-part interview with him, yeah.
This is the time to subscribe. How much does it cost to subscribe to Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World?
It's absolutely free.
Absolutely free. Just come on down. Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World. Just put it in your machine. Just type those words. It'll find it. And a new episode drops every Friday. Boy, Jimmy, I don't even know that we've had all the lines full this early. I feel like we should just go to some calls, and then I'm going to try hard though all day.
Good.
Let's start in Atlanta, Georgia, where Jim is listening to EWTN channel 130 on Sirius XM satellite radio. Jim, so happy to have you. Thanks for starting us off. Go ahead with your question for Jimmy.
Thank you. So I've been waiting to ask this question, and today is the feast of St. Catherine of Siena, so it couldn't be more appropriate.
Okay.
What's the difference between Catholic mystics and Protestant mystics? So I've done some research, and I really couldn't find much about Protestant mystics except for some names. And my assumption would be that if God has revealed certain things to Catholic mystics, and we believe that to be true, then wouldn't he have revealed to Protestant mystics that they are not in the true faith, and so on?
Okay, well, what God reveals to someone depends on a variety of factors, including what the person is willing and capable of receiving. So we know from Scripture that God gives grace to all people, and Jesus talks about that. He talks about how his Father makes the sun shine on the righteous and the unrighteous, and how his Father gives rain to the righteous and the unrighteous. And to us, we can sometimes think of rain as a negative thing because, I mean, there's even the saying in English, into every life some rain must fall, as if rain is a bad thing. But if you're in an agrarian world where you're living hand to mouth and need to grow crops to survive, rain is a good thing. And so Jesus uses it as a symbol of how God is generous to all people. And he is generous not just with natural graces like sunshine and rain, but also with supernatural graces. And he, as you know, Scripture tells us, he doesn't want anyone to perish, but everybody to come to a knowledge of the truth and be saved. And even though that's God's overall intention for everybody, it doesn't mean that everybody comes to a full and conscious knowledge of the truth. There are people who have just take Catholics, for example. There are Catholics who have mistaken ideas, but it doesn't stop them from being saved. They may have erroneous theological ideas. They may have ideas that are even formally heretical just because they've been badly catechized, but God can still work with them. And there are also people who are not formally Catholic, who God's working in their heart, and they're in a state of grace, so they're in a state of salvation. And in some cases, God may give people the grace to realize, hey, I need to become Catholic. God did that for me, for example, and I'm very grateful for that. But not everybody is as fortunate as that, and God can still work with people even if they aren't, even if they aren't given that specific revelation that they need to become Catholic. And so, and I could document this a number of ways historically and even biblically, but merely the fact that someone is having a mystical experience of God doesn't mean that the number one item on the agenda is going to be, you've got to become Catholic. God may have other purposes that he's working through that person's life with, either for that other person or for people close to that person. And so there can be other issues that mean you've got to become Catholic is not the top priority for this particular person, even when they're having an encounter with God. And so I wouldn't dismiss a claim that is made by someone who is Protestant, who claims to have had an encounter with God. Like, let's say they have a family member who's dying. Let's say it's their grandmother, and their grandmother, in this case, let's suppose, has not really been living a good life, and they're very concerned about their grandmother's salvation. And then when the grandmother dies, the person is praying and feels that God has touched their heart and said, don't worry, your grandmother is with me. She made it. She repented sufficiently that she's going to be with me. And I wouldn't tell a Protestant, oh, that must be wrong. You didn't have a mystical experience because the first thing God told you was not, you've got to become Catholic. In this case, the person was hurting. They were very concerned about their grandmother's salvation. And I can see God saying, okay, right now, I'm going to let this person know that their grandmother is okay. And we can work on these other issues later. So that addresses the issue of would a mystical experience be valid in a Protestant context, even if they're not immediately told that they need to become Catholic? I think the answer is, yeah, it can be. Now, in terms of, you mentioned you couldn't find a lot of information about Protestant mystics. That's partly because after the Reformation, one of the items that came up in apologetic discussions between Protestants and Catholics was mystical experience. Catholics would say, hey, wait, we've had this history of God showing up, of the Virgin Mary showing up in visions and talking to people and other saints. And the Protestants were very, especially at the time, were very cool towards the idea of having any interaction with saints. They thought it would be necromancy if you had contact with saints. They didn't want you asking for the saints' intercession. And so they wanted to downplay all of those experiences that seemed to confirm Catholic teaching. And so an idea developed in many Protestant circles that the age, not just the age of public revelation was over, but that the age of private revelation was over. And so as a result, according to them, God no longer gave anybody private revelations, and so you didn't have that as a mystical experience. Now, there has been what the effect of that was, because God did still work in people's lives, he did still touch their hearts, is that the mystical experiences that Protestants would report would be much more subtle, typically, because if they reported, I have a vision, God gave me a vision, they would not be taken seriously. They would be told, oh, that must be a demon, because the age of public and private revelation is over, or you're hallucinating or something like that. But there was still some room for people at least having mystical feelings, like God is guiding me in some way, and I feel that happening even though it's not revelation, or God has given me joy, or things like that. And so there was a kind of more muted mystical experience that you would that Protestants would be able to report and still be taken seriously, but not full-blown visions and things like that. This began to change around the year there were precedents in the 1800s, but especially around the year 1900, and then in 1906 there was the Pentecostal revival in Azusa Street in Los Angeles. Azusa stands for A to Z USA, so that's where we get Azusa Street. And there was even though there were some precedents before this, there was a big reported outpouring of new mystical experiences, including prophecies and speaking in tongues. And that went on to inspire the Pentecostal and charismatic movements in Protestant circles in the 20th century. And so today, actually, there is a lot more reported mystical experience in the Protestant community. It's still not fully accepted. There are still people who, in the Protestant community who assume and believe that all of the reported miraculous phenomena that Pentecostals and charismatics report must be false, because they really believe in this idea that there is no more revelation of any kind today. So it's a source of controversy, but there is more reported mystical experiences in the Protestant community than there used to be.
And we'll leave it there. I hope that was helpful to you, Jim. Thank you very, very much for that question. Our sale, the store-wide sale at shop.catholic.com is coming to an end on Sunday night. So you can get sale prices 10 to 25% off, in some cases more than 25% off at shop.catholic.com, but it ends Sunday night. So get your savings now at shop.catholic.com.
We're here for you. Call now. Catholic Answers Live.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Real Estate for Life. Real Estate for Life connects home buyers and sellers to real estate agents while supporting pro-life organizations. On the web at realestateforlife.org.
This is Bernadette Boguski, Executive Director of WCCR Cleveland, AM 1260 The Rock. Why do we need Catholic radio? To reach the hearts, minds, and souls of those who are searching for deeper meaning and don't know where to turn. To bring clarity to a world full of lies and confusion, and to share the good news of joy and mercy with a world so desperate for the truth.
The world needs EWTN Catholic Radio, now more than ever.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. I didn't know about the Azusa Street revival, so I'm glad Jim called and asked his question. That's a fascinating thing. I'm going to have to read more about that. Not too far from us here in Los Angeles.
We could do a road trip.
Yeah. Have you ever done a Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World on it?
Not on that, no. Oh. But it's a possibility. Well, I have done Mysterious World on private revelations and how they're viewed from a Catholic perspective, as well as individual private revelations, including Fatima, La Salette, and Akita.
I also never knew Azusa was A to Z USA, because Los Angeles has so many funny town names, in like the City of Commerce, and I don't mean to insult the people in the City of Commerce, but I mean, it's like, really, that was the name? But they have all these. I've always wondered about. There just seems to be a period right around when LA was growing that people were very adventurous in their naming of these places.
Well, and that kind of grows out of, trends that were already there in the 19th century. It just makes you kind of, with a name like Azusa, A to Z USA, kind of makes you want to just absquatulate and head on up there.
That's right. Let's absquatulate, but don't get defenestrated. Let's go to South Bend, Indiana, the home of a major Catholic institution. Listening on the Catholic Answers Live app is Troy in South Bend. Troy, thank you so much for your call. Go ahead with your question for Jimmy Akin.
Hi, Jimmy. First of all, I just wanted to thank you. Your The Fathers Knows Best book was foundational in my conversion to Catholicism from Protestantism. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. So my question for you is this. When we're evangelizing to folks who may be convinced of the resurrection, they've made an act of faith in it, based off of looking at, the historical evidence, for example, how can they then move to belief in the authority of the Catholic Church? Because it seems to me that if you make an argument to them, by appealing to sacred tradition, which gleans its veracity from the teaching authority of the Catholic Church, it seems like there's some circular reasoning there. And I'm just wondering how you can parse that out. It's not like you can just hit them with Bible verses and then they'll be convinced like I was, because there's an authority issue there. So yeah, I'm curious, how can someone reason their way to that faith and the fundamental doctrine of the authority of the Church?
Okay, well, if you have reasoned your way to Jesus Christ rose from the dead, then a standard principle to apply at that point is, okay, how can we explain that Jesus Christ rose from the dead? People don't normally rise from the dead. That's not something people normally have the ability to do. And so this is an extraordinary thing that's happened. And so I would say, well, whoever does the extraordinary thing is the one most qualified to tell you how they did it. Now, to give an example, back 100 years ago, Harry Houdini was a very famous magician and escapologist or escape artist, and he did many amazing things. Now, at the time, there was a movement known as spiritualism that held that there can be really close contact between people and departed human spirits, and that it's easy and okay to summon them up and talk to them. And there were some very famous people who were into spiritualism, like Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, the author of the Sherlock Holmes stories. Well, he became aware of Harry Houdini, and he saw Houdini do a whole bunch of different things, and they got to know each other. And Arthur Conan Doyle believed that Harry Houdini, even though he wouldn't acknowledge it, that Harry Houdini had mystical powers, that he was doing these things mystically. Maybe he did some stage tricks, but Conan Doyle thought, oh, this really goes beyond stage tricks. He must have psychic powers that he's using to do these things. And Harry Houdini said, no, this is all a stage trick. I don't have supernatural abilities. So who would you trust in that situation? I would say the person who performs the act is the one who's qualified to tell you how it's done. And so in this case, Harry Houdini is the one performing the act. If he says this is a trick, I'm going to take Harry Houdini's word over Conan Doyle's interpretation of it. So we can take that principle and apply it in other situations, including the situation of Jesus rising from the dead. If Jesus rises from the dead, he's the one who's qualified to tell us how he did it. And he told us it was by the power of God, and among other things, it attested to his role in God's plan as the Messiah. And so we then need to take Jesus's teaching seriously, because he's come to announce God's word, and the resurrection is proof of his role in God's plan and proof that his teaching is true. And then from that, we can say, okay, let's take a look at the biblical evidence regarding his church. And we can discover from various passages, he set up a church. It's a single church because he refers to it in the singular, talking about my church, not my churches. He makes Peter the head of it. He sets up the apostles. He gives them authority to do various things, including forgive sins and also govern the church. And there's actually a robust, fairly robustly developed doctrine of the church in the New Testament itself. I explored this some years ago in a talk I actually gave at an evangelical seminary. Or the talk is called "Why Be Catholic? An Exercise for Evangelicals." It's on my webpage, jimmyakin.com. If you Google "Why Be Catholic? An Exercise for Evangelicals," Jimmy Akin, it will come up, and you can read that. There's more to say about how authority works in the church, but one of the things you find when you read the New Testament itself is that they didn't simply have a Scripture alone perspective. They incorporated tradition, and they incorporated the magisterium of the church. Now, tradition and the magisterium, tradition and Scripture do not gain their authority from the magisterium. The magisterium, they already have their authority because they're from God. What the magisterium does is help us correctly identify which are the authoritative scriptures and which are the authoritative traditions. I write about that in my book, The Bible is a Catholic Book. And so, I because of the pace of live radio, I can't really continue and give you a full explanation of that right now, but I'd recommend that book to you, and I'd suggest, Cy, maybe we can send Troy a copy of The Bible is a Catholic Book.
Troy, if you hang on the line, we are permitted to send books to South Bend, Indiana, so just hang on the line, and we'll get your address if you'd like, and we'll send you a copy of that. The Bible is a Catholic Book. It's open forum today. Phone's quite full. I noticed it seems that I think both of our first two callers said some very nice things to Jimmy about his role in their conversion. And maybe Catholic Answers more generally has played a role in your conversion or in your coming closer to Jesus and his church. If that's the case, we would really appreciate your testimonial. And we've got a phone number. You just call and ask to leave your story and record it. And we may use it on the air at some future time. They do mean a great deal to us. You just dial 888-291-8000, ask to leave your story, give you whatever length it is. It's perfectly fine with us. 888-291-8000 if you'd like to share your testimonial of how Catholic Answers has been helpful in your life. Our number here is 888-318-7884. Jimmy Akin is our guest, and up next is Michael in Florida, watching on YouTube Live. Michael, thanks for waiting. Go ahead with your question for Jimmy.
Yes, hi. Thank you for having me on.
Hi, Michael.
And I'll give my testimonial now. I mean, thanks to you guys. I mean, this year I've come back to the faith, and your podcast and some of the others have been very instrumental in that. And I thank you for not just you guys, but everybody at Catholic Answers for all the work that you do.
Thank you, Michael. That means a lot to us. It really does.
No, and your work means a lot to me. So thanks. I'll get to my question. So I've been reading lately a lot on the Passion narrative due to the season of the year, and reading through it, one thing that's just I don't know, it just kind of bothers me a little bit is I know in the Creed we always say that Christ was crucified under Pilate, but I kind of question his culpability a little bit because it just seems to me. He was almost playing like a judge. The Pharisees were almost like a prosecutor, and the people were like the jury. And he almost, he gives Christ like several chances even to like recant, even if it wasn't true. Like it almost seemed like he didn't want to go through with it, but the people just kept pressuring and pressuring. So I'm just kind of curious to Jimmy's take on that, and why don't we say he was crucified by us, not just by Pilate?
Okay.
Well, so in the Creed, where we say crucified under Pontius Pilate, it's for historical reasons. It's not that people are hating on Pilate. It's making the point, this is when it happened, because Pontius Pilate was governor of Judea in a very specific range of years between AD 26 and AD 36. And by saying Jesus was crucified under Pontius Pilate, that shows us tells us when this happened, and it shows us that the Christian faith is rooted in real history. This is something that really happened. It didn't happen in mythical time. It's not like in pagan religions where, for example, in Egypt, okay, you have this conflict between Osiris and Isis and Set. And Set kills Osiris and cuts up his body and throws it into the Nile, and then Isis gets it back together and kind of brings Osiris back from the dead, kind of, sort of. He's sort of a zombie king now. And that's something that cannot be located in history. It occurs in the Egyptian religion in mythic time. You couldn't put a date on this and say, well, it happened during the reign of this pharaoh. But we can say when Jesus was crucified, it was in the reign of this Roman governor. And so that shows us our faith is rooted in history. As to Pilate's culpability, I'll have more to say about that on the other side of the break.
Hang on, Michael, and we'll get you that rest of that answer from Jimmy Akin. Open Forum, Catholic Answers Live. More after this.
Call now. Catholic Answers Live.
To many people, even many Christians, purgatory is a fantasy, or worse, a wicked lie invented by the church to make salvation complicated and keep people in fear. But I'm here to tell you that purgatory is fact, not fiction. The Bible supports it, Christians have historically believed in it, and it makes theological sense. In my new book, Purgatory is for Real, I provide the evidence and reasoning to help you understand this controversial doctrine and demonstrate how it's actually a joyful, hopeful reality, not something shadowy and mysterious, but a sign of God's love and mercy. To get your copy of Purgatory is for Real, visit shop.catholic.com today or ask for it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
Did you know you can access Catholic Answers Live right from your phone or other mobile device? Download the Catholic Answers Live app today. The Catholic Answers Live app, available now on iOS and Android.
If you spend any time on Twitter, Facebook, or mainstream media, you're probably familiar with the litany of slogans that skeptics employ to rescue you from the foolish belief that God exists. The constant onslaught seems to leave people with the idea that they have no alternative but to embrace atheism. How can a Christian respond? In One Less God Than You, John DeRosa breaks down 20 of the most common atheist challenges and shows you how to craft effective answers. Atheism is more aggressive and widespread than ever. Read One Less God Than You and prepare yourself to respond with the joyful truth that God is real. To get your copy of One Less God Than You, visit shop.catholic.com today or ask for it at a good Catholic bookstore near you. Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. Jimmy Akin, our guest for both hours today for Open Forum. You're welcome to call, whether you're Catholic or not, and whatever your question is. Jimmy's happy to take it. 888-318-7884. On the phone right now, Michael in Florida, asking about just how culpable was Pontius Pilate in the passion and death of Jesus.
So we can't really know a person's heart without divine revelation, and the Gospels don't tell us what the exact state of Pilate's heart was at the time of the crucifixion. The best we can do is form an appraisal based on a person's observed behavior and try to say, okay, well, what would that at least suggest about the state of the person's heart? Now, regardless of what Pilate's culpability was at the time of the crucifixion, even let's suppose it was mortally sinful for Pilate to do this, and horrendously mortally sinful. Well, okay, fine. That's a possibility for the state of his heart. I mean, people do sometimes commit horrendous mortal sins, but God is merciful, and God wants everybody to be saved. And so even if Pilate was gravely personally responsible for the crucifixion, that wouldn't mean that God was done with him. He could repent and achieve salvation. And in fact, in some parts of Eastern Christendom, Pontius Pilate is regarded as a saint. The church doesn't teach that he's a saint, but some Christians regard him as one. I personally don't think we have particularly good evidence for that, but that's just my personal opinion. What we know about Pontius Pilate is that after the crucifixion, he continued as a governor to do things that displeased his Jewish subjects, and in AD 36 he was recalled to Rome and eventually exiled, and he then died in exile in France, if I recall correctly. And so he wasn't regarded as a particularly good governor, even apart from the situation with Jesus. If we focus in on his actions during the crucifixion, it seems clear that the evangelists, and not just one of them, but multiple evangelists, indicate that he was reluctant for various reasons in putting Jesus to death. And he didn't do it. He wasn't just champing at the bit saying, oh, this is great. I've got this Jewish, rebel king. I'm going to put him to death and show the Jews what's what, and don't you dare defy the Roman state. And I'm so looking forward to putting this guy to death. Instead, we have him getting a message from his wife saying, don't have anything to do with that innocent man because I had this dream and it was really bad, and so don't mess with him. And dreams are taken very seriously by Romans. And so he took that seriously. He may have, from his conversations with Jesus, which were likely conducted through a translator, but he may have, through his conversations with Jesus, gotten the sense, yeah, this is an innocent guy. And by his actions, he shows that he's trying to find a way to release Jesus without putting him to death. And so he, for example, proposes Jesus as the Passover amnesty prisoner. He's got this custom of every year he declares amnesty for a particular prisoner and releases them. And he volunteers Jesus and says, do you want me to release to you Jesus? And the Jewish authorities stir up the crowd to say, no, we want Barabbas. And so he ends up releasing Barabbas as at the point a riot is starting. And so he releases Barabbas, and he ends up putting Jesus to death, but he also washes his hands. So he's distancing himself from his actions in putting Jesus to death. So what this shows us is he's not fully culpable the way he would be if he was just champing at the bit to put Jesus to death. He clearly shows multiple signs of, I'm not fully on.
Michael, I think
he's trying to get Jesus off, and he's otherwise distancing himself from the order he's about to give. So that's all in his favor. At the same time, that doesn't mean that he's not mortally sinning in doing this. Just because a person does a mortal sin somewhat reluctantly, or commit a grave sin somewhat reluctantly, doesn't mean that it's not still a mortal sin. Suppose that Cy Kellett was the governor of Catholic Answers, and other people, other people bring an employee to Cy Kellett and say, this person has done horrible things, you need to kill him. And they force a gun into Cy Kellett's hands and start chanting, kill him, kill him, kill him. And Cy is like, oh, wait, I don't want to kill this guy.
Trent.
But let's say Trent. So Cy is like, queasy. He doesn't want to kill Trent. No. He doesn't think Trent has done anything worthy of death. He sees, good aspects to Trent. But still, finally, he goes ahead and shoots Trent dead. Okay?
Yeah.
Is that still a mortal sin for Cy? He wasn't in fear of his life. He wasn't himself about to be killed if he didn't kill Trent. He's not relieved fully, even though he's got some qualms. He's not fully relieved of his responsibility. So Cy Kellett commits a mortal sin by killing Trent Horn dead. And in the same way, I would say that Pontius Pilate, even though it's to his credit that he had qualms and tried to find other solutions, the fact he ultimately went ahead with putting an innocent man to death, who he believed to be innocent, indicates that he is committing a grave sin, and the odds are that it was mortal, but still God can work with him and he could repent and end up in heaven, and hopefully he did.
How's that, Michael? All make sense to you?
No, that was great. I really appreciate it. And you actually clarified something else, because I thought Cy was already the governor of Catholic.
Oh, heck no, man. Oh, you should see the org chart. I am nowhere near the top of that. If you ever came here, you would realize I am not the governor of Catholic Answers. Thanks, Michael. 888-318-7884, the number 888-318-7884. So it's interesting to me, Jimmy, this is not a court trial. Like, governors had the responsibility to decide who lived and who died, and it's pretty much... It seems a little bit capricious. Is that how?
Well, it was capricious, yeah.
Yeah.
And now it is a court trial in the sense it's not a modern court trial where you have a jury and a prosecutor and a defense attorney.
Right.
But he is given the ability to declare death sentences by his office, and in fact, it's pointed out in one of the Gospels, they have to go to him, because a few years earlier, the Romans had deprived the Jewish Sanhedrin, that was the Jewish governing body, of the ability to implement capital punishment. So they're not legally allowed to do it. Now, that didn't stop lynchings from happening, but it does mean that they're not able to do it by process of law, so they have to go to the Roman governor for that. And that, incidentally, gives us some clues as to when some later events happen. Like when Paul is about to be converted, and he is hauling people off to their deaths.
Right, so that's a Jewish authority able to kill people.
That's backing him, yeah.
Right.
And what that tells us is it was likely in AD 36, after Pilate was recalled and before the new governor Marcellus got there.
Oh, yeah, so while there's a break, we can do what we want.
Yeah, and we see the same thing happening later on in the AD 60s, where the Roman governor is not there and a new one is on his way, and the Jewish authorities take advantage of the situation to put James the Just, the so-called brother of Jesus, to death in AD 62. It's another one that occurs in a gap between two Roman governors.
But this is a consequence of that part of the world being occupied, because he couldn't have done this to Paul because Paul was a Roman citizen, right? So if Jesus had been a Roman citizen, Pilate couldn't have killed him.
Correct, yes. If you're a Roman citizen, you have the right to appeal your case to Caesar and be judged by him, which is what Paul did.
Yeah, and that didn't go very well, apparently.
Oh, actually, no, it did.
Oh, it did.
The
okay.
evidence we have is that Paul was taken to Rome at the end of the book of Acts. He spends 2 years under house arrest. His case is eventually heard, and according to later Christian sources, he was released.
Oh,
he was vindicated. And then the Great Fire of Rome happened in July of 64. And then in 65, Nero starts blaming Christians for the fire. And in 65 or 66, he martyrs Peter. And Paul gets taken back into custody.
I see.
And is re-imprisoned and is put to death in 67.
So Claudius would have been the emperor that let Paul go then. And then, is that right?
Nero.
Oh, Nero let Paul go. And then Nero executed him.
Well, the evidence we have is that Nero didn't personally do it. That Nero was on a tour of Greece at the time that Paul was executed. That Nero he went off to Greece and he was winning all of these lyre playing competitions and chariot races and things like that.
Amazingly. Yeah, it was like America's Got Talent or whatever the show is, America, and he just won them all over Greece.
He won them all. Yes.
He better.
But he needed someone to be in charge of Rome while he was gone, so he left a couple of guys in charge of Rome who were governing it in his absence.
I see.
And according to First Clement, who's writing in the first half of AD 70, he says Paul was tried in essence before the governors, plural. So that indicates that it was likely the governors that Nero had left in charge that were the ones that sentenced Paul.
Fascinating stuff. I'm really glad we had that question. We have to take a quick break. We'll be right back with more Open Forum with Jimmy Akin on Catholic Answers Live.
Hello, this is Archbishop Salvatore Cordileone of San Francisco. Keep your dial tuned to Catholic Answers Live.
No prayer is useless. All prayer has power. If you say the rosary, it's real prayer because it's a mini scripture. If you say a novena prayer, it's a real prayer. It's just somebody there to help you when your mind is blank, to give glory and praise to God, to be humble and ask for whatever it is you want. All prayer is pleasing to God if it's done with a grateful, loving heart.
You've heard that St. Paul Street Evangelization supports hundreds of teams of evangelists sharing the good news. But did you know that some of these teams are public prayer stations? Set up a sign on the sidewalk and offer prayer and encouragement to those you encounter. Everyone needs prayer. Try this new method of witnessing to Jesus. Contact St. Paul Street Evangelization to get started at streetevangelization.com. That's streetevangelization.com.
Welcome back. Catholic Answers Live. I'm Cy Kellett, your host. Jimmy Akin, our guest, both hours. It's open forum. And lots of folks knew Jimmy was coming, I think, because we got the lines are quite full. So I'll keep going. Noah in Westmont, Illinois, watching on YouTube Live. You're next. Noah, thank you for waiting. Go ahead with your question for Jimmy.
Hi. Thanks so much for having me on. So in case you haven't seen Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, there's a famous scene in that movie that I've kind of felt convicted about in the past, where like he drinks this enchanted blood in the cave of this cult that he was invading, like that worships some Indian demonic deity, and he becomes demon possessed as a result, and is unaware of who he is and goes through this seance to undergo it. And relating to that and other things, I've just been wondering, how convicted should we be about that as Christians? Watching that sort of thing. Like, is that something that we should feel okay about doing?
Or should we not watch it?
How do you discern?
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. How do we discern go ahead, Jimmy.
Okay, so it's been a while since I've seen Indiana Jones in the Temple of Doom. I don't recall him becoming possessed. He is, later in the film, he does drink this stuff, but I interpreted that as like he's under mind control, but not specifically by a demon. Because he's like enchanted by what happens. He's under somebody's control, but it doesn't appear to be a demon in the Christian sense of the term. At least it's not obvious that it is. And they don't do an exorcism on him to cure him of this. It's more like he's gotten this drug in him from the drink that makes him highly suggestible and willing to go along with what the evil group is doing. So, but let's suppose it was demonic possession. Let's suppose that's what George Lucas and Steven Spielberg were portraying there. Is it okay for Christians to consume media that portrays demonic possession? Well, let's see what Cy Kellett thinks. Cy Kellett, can you read the Bible?
Yes, I can, as a matter of fact.
Yeah, okay. Well, the Bible is a form of media. It's books and sometimes audio books and sometimes made into movies. But the Bible depicts demonic possession and real demonic possession, not just getting under the influence of a drug or something. So yeah, it is fine for Christians to, in principle, for Christians to consume media that depicts demonic possession. Now, does that mean that it's always okay to do that? Well, no, it doesn't mean it's always okay to do that. There could be situations where it's not okay. But, if, for example, let's suppose someone has OCD and let's suppose obsessive compulsive disorder. So they have these compulsive thoughts that are distressing to them and they can't get rid of. And suppose that a person with OCD is consuming media that has to do with demonic possession, and the possession stuff gets into their OCD and starts torturing them. Well, it would be better for a person in that situation to not watch media, and just say, okay, when I've got a better handle on my OCD, maybe I'll watch it later. But for right now, I'm not going to put myself through this stress. Or suppose that someone has temptations towards Satanism, and people have a fallen nature. Some people who are Christian or nominally Christian, are going to have temptations towards Satanism. Well, those people might not be the best people to watch depictions of demonic possession. It might play on their temptations. But for a normal Christian who has a healthy conscience and who is not tempted towards Satanism and is not going to have compulsive thoughts about this and who does not approve of demons, well, in some cases, watching or consuming media that has demonic possession in it could play a valid cautionary role. It could help them realize, hey, this is a real thing. It's really dangerous. It's really bad. And I need to stay away from situations where this could happen. So it could play a positive role. So it really is going to depend on a variety of factors. Now, I just named some clear cases where it would be bad or clear cases where it would be good. Most people are going to be kind of in the middle, and it's going to be up to their individual preferences, and it's also going to depend on the nature of the it's going to depend on the nature of the particular presentation that they're watching or consuming. When you read the Bible, it's not really dwelling on the gory details very much. And so that probably has a broader audience than a movie that really goes into it hardcore in depicting the gory details of possession. Famously, the movie The Exorcist is really very intense and is not considered to be for everybody. In fact, it's got an R rating. Interestingly, I was recently watching a lecture on ghosts by a Assyriologist, Irving Finkel of the British Museum, and he talked about The Exorcist. Because they had lots of ghost legends and ghost lore in ancient Mesopotamia, and he talks about in his lecture he talks about the Exorcist and says this is a really intense, gross film. Do not watch it. But he also points out that the demon that they blame in The Exorcist, a demon named Pazuzu, who is a real Mesopotamian figure, actually is a protector of humanity in Mesopotamian lore, that Pazuzu protects humans against demons that would cause bad dreams. And so he felt a grave injustice had been done to Pazuzu, and that if they make a future Exorcist film, legal action should be taken to defend Pazuzu's reputation. Needless to say, Irving Finkel is a bit of a character. But to the general question of is it sometimes okay to consume media that depicts demonic possession? Yeah, it is.
All right, Noah, I really hope that is helpful for you. Thank you very, very much for your questions. I'm going to keep moving, try to get as many on as I can. I'm going to Shrewsbury, Massachusetts now. Eric in Shrewsbury, listening on the new and improved Catholic Answers Live app. Go ahead, Eric, with your question for Jimmy.
Thank you for taking my call. I'm engaging a pair of Latter-day Saint missionaries on the topic of the Great Apostasy. While I'm well-formed in apologetics in the early church, what are some key talking points I can use?
Okay, well, so I would point to the fact that Jesus says in Matthew 16 that I will build my church. He's talking to Peter, and he says, "You are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell will not prevail against it." So the gates of hell are, or Hades is what it actually says in Greek. Hades, or Hades, if you want to say it the Greek way, Hades is the place of the dead in Greek thought. And so it's not hell in our sense of the place of the damned, it's the place of the dead. And as a result, Jesus is saying, well, my church is never going to die. And so that would mean that his church is not going to fall away at any point. It's still going to be there when he gets back at the second coming. It might be very small, but it will not fall and into apostasy and need to be restarted later on. Also, at the very end of Matthew, in Matthew chapter 28, Jesus tells the apostles, all authority on heaven and on earth has been given to me, and behold, I'm going to be with you unto the end of the age. So until he comes back, until the next age starts, the age of ages, he's guiding his church and protecting his church, and he's got all the authority in heaven and earth. So that's another sign that his church is not going to fall into apostasy. Now, the key text that people who want to maintain that there was an apostasy in the early church, the key text they're going to want to appeal to is in the Thessalonian letters. And you need to read both of them, because Paul is talking to the Thessalonians about some erroneous ideas that they have. And one of the things he tells them is that the day of the Lord will not come until this event comes first. And in the King James Bible, which Mormons commonly use, it's translated the apostasy. And so they'll appeal to this verse and say, well, there is an apostasy that is going to occur at some point. But notice, and there are two things to say about that. First one is apostasy is not necessarily the best translation here. There is a good case to be made that a different word, rebellion, is the word that should apply here. But regardless of whether you interpret it as an apostasy or a rebellion, notice when it occurs. It is not early in church history. It's right before the second coming. Paul uses it as a sign for the Corinthians that the second coming is close. And so that's part of his argument, because some of them are thinking the day of the Lord has already occurred and somehow we missed it. And it's like, no, don't you remember what I told you? The second coming and the day of the Lord will not happen until this event happens first. And so it's obviously in their future, and it's not early on, and it's not in the first century, which is when some Mormons will actually try to say, oh, the great apostasy was already beginning even in the first century. So those are some points to make. I'd also recommend a book that Catholic Answers published called The Apostasy That Wasn't, that goes into the patristic age and shows the continuity of the Christian church and the Catholic Church specifically. It's by Rob Bennett, and I'd suggest you check out that book.
As a matter of fact, we can send it to him. Eric in Shrewsbury, how's that, all that work for you, all that answer?
Sounds fantastic. You've been thinking along the same lines that I've been thinking, so that works out well.
Very good, Eric. Well, if you'd like the Rob Bennett's book, The Apostasy That Wasn't, just hang on the line, and we'll send it to you. We got another hour with Jimmy Akin of Open Forum, so if you're on the line, don't go anywhere. And if you haven't dialed yet, you're welcome to call 888-318-7884. Jimmy's senior apologist here at Catholic Answers. We already gave away one copy of his book, The Bible is the Catholic Book, a very popular book because it's quite a straightforward and readable explanation of who the people were who wrote the Bible, where the Bible came from, how the Bible was assembled. The Bible is a Catholic book, available at shop.catholic.com. Jimmy, over on Facebook, Michael said, just once, I'd like to see Jimmy wear a cowboy hat. And I thought, I've seen Jimmy wear a cowboy hat lots of times.
Yeah, well, we'll see what we can do about that.
Well, maybe you can help him out and put a cowboy hat on. Coming up on Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World tomorrow, it's Weird Questions. It's the fifth. How does this work?
Friday.
It's the fifth Friday, and fifth Friday is Weird Questions Day.
Right. The other 4 Fridays, we have brand new episodes.
Yeah, that's okay. The 4 Fridays brand new episodes, but they're a little weird themselves, or they can be a bit weird themselves.
Mm-hmm.
888-318-7884, our number. You're welcome to call if you have a question about anything, and you don't have to be Catholic to call. Jimmy Akin is our guest. He's senior apologist here at Catholic Answers, and he'll talk to you about anything. If you got a science question, maybe you got a question about morals, maybe you got a question about something that the church teaches, the doctrine of the church. You want to know something about the sacraments, you want to know something about the Pope, it's all up for grabs.
Pope Bigfoot.
Or Bigfoot. If you have we taken
Pope Bigfoot?
Is there such a thing as Pope Bigfoot?
I was recently asked about that.
I had no idea you had been asked about Pope Bigfoot, and now there's only a few seconds left, but when we come back, I will have to ask about Pope Bigfoot, which is a great tease, a great reason for you to hang around for our second hour with Jimmy Akin here on Catholic Answers Live. Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. I'm Cy Kellett, your host. Jimmy Akin is our guest. It's quite a busy afternoon here. Lots and lots of calls. Our number is 888-318-7884. You're welcome to call with your questions for Jimmy. Whether you're Catholic or not, I do want to make sure that we are quite clear that you don't have to be Catholic to call. You don't have to agree with the Catholic Church to call. If you have a question, something that you'd like clarified, something that you'd like to understand, you are welcome to call. 888-318-7884, 888-318-7884. Jimmy is senior apologist here at Catholic Answers, the author of a whole bunch of books, including A Daily Defense, 365 Days, plus one, to becoming a better apologist. For a second, I thought I said the wrong thing, but to becoming a better apologist.
Don't say the wrong thing.
No, this is, you should have heard me yesterday, Jimmy. Were you here, Sarah, yesterday when I couldn't say anything right? Even the name of the guest, I said it wrong, I think 3 times. It was a humiliating day for me.
Oh, but you're being a super professional today, so that's awesome.
I know. I've really recommitted myself to the craft of radio today. Again, 888-318-7884, our number. I think I've said this, but the lines have been quite busy, so I'm going to continue to keep going back to callers quite quickly. DJ in New Jersey watching on YouTube Live. You are next. DJ, thank you for your call. Go ahead with your question for Jimmy.
Hey, thanks so much for taking my call.
Happy to.
My question is about, are there different levels of heaven, or some people say different layers of heaven? I think in 2 Corinthians 12:2, it says like there are 3 levels in heaven. And I've heard from other sources, I've heard this kind of theory. So I'm just wondering, is it true? And if it is, what does it mean?
Okay.
Oh, Jimmy's wearing a cowboy hat. Sorry, just shocked. I just looked up and you're wearing a cowboy hat. That was not professional. I apologize.
We had a request for that, so I always like to fulfill requests when I can.
Just knocked me over when I looked up and saw it. Sorry.
Yeah.
Levels of heaven.
I like to surprise Cy by things I'm wearing that I don't announce.
Like the time that you wore celery.
Yeah.
Yes.
Which I had a perfectly understandable reason for.
You did indeed, but it knocked me over just like the cowboy hat just did all of a sudden. I don't know why.
Yeah.
Are there levels in heaven, Jimmy?
So what we can be very confident of is that there are different levels of heaven in the sense that people receive different rewards in heaven. One of the things that is stressed multiple times in the New Testament is that that God rewards people according to their works, and since people have different levels of works, they do different amounts of good things in their lives, they're going to get different rewards in heaven. And one way that could be visualized is by depicting heaven as if it's kind of like a hotel with multiple different floors or layers. And the more you've done to cooperate with God's grace and to please God, the higher up in the hotel you get to go. You got a better view. Maybe you're in the penthouse if you're the Virgin Mary or something, right up at the top. So what we can be sure of is that there are different rewards. We also know that the various literature from this is called the Second Temple period. It's when the Israelites had come back from the Babylonian exile and had rebuilt their temple, and then Herod expanded it, and it didn't get destroyed until AD 70. So this whole period is called the Second Temple era. And we know that in Second Temple literature, there are sources that talk about heaven having more, or talk about there being more than one heaven. And we do see St. Paul discussing this in Second Corinthians, where he's talking about being caught up to the third heaven. There is a debate about what does he mean by that, because according to one way of reading the text, you can say, okay, well, if you think about how the Old Testament talks about heaven, it uses it to refer to a few different things. One of the things it uses the word heaven to refer to is the atmosphere, where the birds are. So you can read about the birds of heaven. But then it also gets used to refer to what we would consider outer space. They didn't call it that back then. They didn't have that concept, but we would call it outer space. And that's where the stars are. So you can also read about the stars of heaven. And then the other place that the term heaven gets used for is where God and the angels are. You know, if you read about God being in heaven, or if you read about the angels of heaven, we've got a third kind of heaven. And so, according to one way of reading St. Paul's reference to third heaven, it could just be a way of talking about where God is, or where, you know, God and the angels are, separate from the atmospheric heaven and the stellar heaven. And it might not mean that in the spiritual heaven there are multiple different layers. On the other hand, there are a lot of sources that indicate from the Second Temple period that indicate there are multiple layers in the spiritual heavens. An example of that would be the Ascension of Isaiah, which was written about the year AD 67. So it's actually older than the book of Revelation. And in the Ascension of Isaiah, Isaiah gets to ascend. That's why it's called the Ascension of Isaiah. Isaiah gets to ascend up to the highest heaven. And the way this book conceptualizes the heavens, you have the atmospheric heaven, the lowest of them, which is called the firmament in the Ascension of Isaiah, and that's where the demons are, and the demons are like fighting with each other, and they're having all kind of squabbles. And I say, as Isaiah ascends through the firmament, he sees them fighting with each other and in contention with each other. And this incidentally also ties into another statement that Paul makes, where he refers to the devil as the prince of the power of the air. And that's because in some of this literature, the devil was regarded, and his demons were regarded as living in the air or in the atmospheric heaven, or the firmament in any event. Beyond the firmament, you have then the first heaven, then you have a second heaven, a third, a fourth, a fifth, a sixth, and finally a seventh heaven. And as Isaiah ascends through the seven heavens, he sees how the angels are increasing in glory, and how each heaven is increasing in glory, until finally, when he gets to the seventh heaven, he sees the Holy Trinity. And this is the most glorious of the heavens. And then he sees, this is in a vision of the future, he sees God send his Son, the Beloved, to descend through the heavens and be incarnate as the baby Jesus. And as the Son descends through the heavens, he takes on the form of the different angels that are in these. So he's like disguising himself. When he's in the sixth heaven, he's disguising himself as a sixth heaven angel. So he's not recognized by the angels of the sixth heaven. And he keeps doing that, and he even sneaks through the firmament, so the demons don't recognize him. And then when he gets born as a baby and he grows up and he's manifested to the world, the demons are like, how did this guy get past us? But then eventually, after the crucifixion and resurrection, Christ reascends all the way up to the top heaven. And so this is an illustration of how the spiritual heaven and the atmosphere were conceptualized in some Second Temple literature. There are other ways of doing it too. Some of them have more than seven heavens. Some of them have a little bit less. In terms of how seriously we should take this, well, I wouldn't suggest pressing it overly literally, because what all of this is trying to do is help us understand the spiritual world when we've never been there, and our minds are not set up presently to be able to visualize and fully understand spiritual realities. So it could be that all of these different layers to heaven are kind of just, so this kind of hotel image of heaven is just a kind of way of helping us understand the different degrees of glory that there are in heaven that correspond to the degree to which humans and angels have cooperated with God's grace and been rewarded.
DJ, thank you very much for the question. I'm going to have to leave it there because we have to take a break. Jimmy Akin is our guest. It's open forum. All the lines full at the moment. And the 20 Answers Summer Reading Challenge continues. So if you want to be, hundreds of people have taken advantage of it. You just go to shop.catholic.com and you get all 44 books in the Catholic Answers 20 Answers series. So 20 Answers the Bible, 20 Answers Mary, Jimmy's latest 20 Answers the End Times, all included, all 44 of those books, 70% off. And we call it the Summer Reading Challenge because you can challenge yourself, see if you can read them all by the end of summer. Shop.catholic.com, 70% off all 44 books in the 20 Answers series.
Let us help you with your question today on Catholic Answers Live.
The Aquinas Writing Advantage program is part of Homeschool Connections' set of online courses for your Catholic homeschool. Homeschool Connections' website is homeschoolconnections.com.
St. Augustine gives us tremendous insight as to why we should pray. He says this: why God should ask us to pray when He knows what we need even before we ask Him may perplex us if we do not realize that our Lord and God does not want to know what we want, for as God He cannot fail to already know it. But rather He wants us to exercise our desire through our prayers, so that we may be able to receive what He is preparing to give us.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. It's open forum. Jimmy Akin is our guest, and I am doing my very best to be a top radio professional today. So far, I think it's going pretty well, despite my shock when I saw Jimmy in a cowboy hat. But
we'll get you on the cover of Talkers Magazine yet.
Talkers Magazine? Do you know about Talkers? Do you get?
Yeah, of course.
You get like their daily.
I don't get it, but I know about it.
Yeah. I get their daily email from Talkers Magazine. Do you know what that is, Sarah? Talkers Magazine? It's a magazine about talk radio for talk radio professionals. So it's just as good as you might imagine. And however, a top radio professional, if he were to conclude 1 hour saying next hour we'll ask Jimmy about Pope Bigfoot, that person eventually would have to pay that off. And as a top radio professional, now, Jimmy, I have to ask you, what is Pope Bigfoot?
Well, this is something that I was recently asked about both on Twitter and also on Michael Lofton's Reason and Theology show. I was asked about could Bigfoot be baptized and ordained and things like that. And so I pointed out that in episode 55 of Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World, we talked about the religious dimension of what would it mean if there were intelligent aliens. And the same principles that I talked about there would apply to intelligent species of a terrestrial origin. So if it turned out that Bigfoot was real and intelligent, then those principles would kick in. And one of the principles deals with the gateway to the sacraments, baptism. If since Christ paid an unlimited price, an infinite price for the sins of the world, and the Catechism actually says it would even cover the angels, that God's mercy is not limited. If the demons wanted to repent, God could forgive them. They just don't want to repent. That's not the way their will works. So as a practical matter, if you had an alien that said, I recognize I'm a sinner, I want to be saved through Jesus Christ, I want to be baptized, you would be able to baptize that alien, at least conditionally. If you are capable of receiving baptism, I baptize you. And that would be the safe and responsible thing to do. If someone is wanting baptism and is willing to undertake a commitment to the Christian life, then you don't want to put a barrier between them and God. So if Bigfoot asked for baptism and was willing to undertake a Christian life, the same thing would apply. The question would be then what other sacraments could he receive? Well, one that there could be some question about is holy orders. And because it's not as clear, could you ordain a non-human as it is, could you baptize a non-human? Because the same issues aren't in play. But if the magisterium ruled, yes, you can ordain Bigfoot, well, then you could. But what if Bigfoot is not another species? Actually, if you go back into the Bigfoot literature, the Yeti and Sasquatch literature before a certain point in the 20th century, they're not, these reported creatures are not conceived of as being non-humans. They're just conceived of as being a different type of human.
Oh.
And in the last 10 years, there was a DNA study done by a woman named Dr. Melba Ketchum, where she had samples of reported Bigfoot DNA that had been submitted for her genetic analysis, and she concluded that they were human with a slight admixture of some other DNA. And so they might count as just a different species of or different kind of human, a different race of humans. Now, if that were true, if they're actually human, then you could ordain Bigfoot, and you could even have a Pope Bigfoot, which people on Twitter and on the chat for Reason and Theology really latched onto and were very excited about the idea of having Pope Bigfoot.
I imagine images were made, that kind of thing.
I haven't seen those yet, but I imagine some people are probably going to be making images of Pope Bigfoot.
Yeah. You know, I
now,
don't...
by the way, I'm not saying Bigfoot exists.
No,
this
was all conditional.
This is all hypothetical.
Yeah. Well, let me throw a theological question out at you, a speculative question, if I may, now that we're on this topic.
All theology is speculative. Doctrine is not, but theology is.
Okay, fair enough. So the Scripture refers to man and human and this, treats us in a certain way as a thing. Is it possible that theologically you might say that what it means to be human is to be this to be made in the image and likeness of God, and so is to have a rational soul, but also the other part of being human is to have a body. Okay, so if we define human that way, not as members of a species, but those who have a body and a rational soul, could we extend and say, well, any rational alien is in fact human in that sense?
It's a legitimate opinion to entertain because today we think of humans, in terms of their genetic code.
Yeah.
What makes you human is your genetic code. Well, they didn't know about genes in the Bible. And so if you actually go back into former literature, you will find, from prior centuries before the discovery of genetics, you will find people talking about, well, if there are people on other planets, well, they're humans too.
Yeah.
They've got a body and a rational soul, and they would be humans. And so, they might look different than us, but they would still be human. And you'll find people saying things like that. So there is some traction in the tradition for regarding a human being as per Aristotle's definition, a rational animal.
Yeah.
And so if you've got an animal nature and you got a rational nature, you're a human. This worked a little bit better in the history of philosophy than Plato's definition. Plato's definition of a human was a featherless biped. And that seemed to work until someone, according to the legend, which is probably just a legend, plucked a chicken and threw it over the wall with a little sign that says Plato's man.
People are so mean to Plato. Come on. He's doing his best. Yeah. He's a philosopher.
Him and Goofy both.
Yeah, that's right. All right, we're going to Toronto, Canada. I'm so glad we got to talk about Pope Bigfoot, however. Anna Maria in Toronto, Canada, watching on YouTube Live. You are next. Thank you so much for your patience. And I don't know if it's Anna Maria or Anna Maria. I said it that way, but how do you say it?
It's Anna Maria.
Anna Maria. Okay, very good.
You guys are making me laugh today. Some really good questions.
Well, thank you.
And you're doing a great job, by the way.
I'm like a radio professional today, wouldn't you think?
Yeah.
I think so.
All right.
You both are doing a great job. Anyways, quick question. Me and my cousin are always trying to evangelize, especially our own family. We were born, raised Catholic, and we're always learning. And so one of the questions that was posed, I think, from a millennial who we're always trying to bring back to the faith and church was, if God is so loving, merciful, why is it that, we explain free will and we explain that, God is also a just God, why is it that when the person chooses not to follow, the Ten Commandments, the way of God, and then, when the time comes that they are going to die, their question is, if we've chosen the other way, why then does there have to be a hell? And why does God just allow people to just die and that's it, that there's no suffering and that there's no hell?
Yeah.
And so, we gave our answers as best that we could, saying that he's a just God. You can't have God without having demons and hell and all that. It wouldn't make sense. But I'm sure Jimmy has a much better explanation, and so that's why I'm calling in.
All right, Anna Maria, thank you.
So essentially the question is, why would God allow someone to be damned rather than simply have them cease to exist? And there have been people who throughout history have proposed the idea that God would simply allow the lost to cease to exist. That's a position known as annihilationism. But it's not the teaching of the church. It's not the teaching of the Christian faith. And the question is a real one that, is worth asking. Well, one of the things, I think it can be approached a number of ways. One of the things that needs to be borne in mind is God is not only a God of mercy and love, he's also a God of justice. He set up the world with a rational order in it, and he's promised that he's going to hold people accountable for their actions. If let's say you're a murderer, and you have knowingly and deliberately, let's say you're Adolf Hitler, and you've knowingly and deliberately murdered millions of people. If you asked many people, would it be fair for Adolf Hitler to just cease to exist and never pay any kind of price for his crimes? A lot of people would that represent justice? A lot of people would say no, that does not represent justice. That Adolf Hitler, think about all of the Jews who and others who were killed during the Nazi Holocaust. If you went to them and said, "Hey, do you think it would be just fair and okay if God just let Adolf Hitler cease to exist despite all of the starvation and medical experiments and slave labor and murder that he committed on you and your people?" A lot of the people from the concentration camps would say, no, he needs to pay a price for the suffering that he inflicted on us. And God has said he's the defender of the defenseless. So even if someone like Adolf Hitler doesn't pay a price in this life, God will make sure that he pays a price in the next life. And so that would be one reason that God would not simply annihilate Adolf Hitler. It would be keep him around in order for him to experience justice for his crimes. Now, there's more that could be said about that, but I'd also like to look at things from another angle. Just because you are suffering does not mean, and the church doesn't understand the sufferings of hell as things that are imposed by God from without, like he's not actively torturing people. Instead, the Catechism conceptualizes the pain of hell, and especially the principal pain of hell, is cutting yourself off from God, who is the source of all good and joy. So it's really you've decided, and at death your choice becomes fixed. You've decided that you don't want to be with God, and since God is the source of all joy, you are cutting yourself off from that joy, and so you're going to experience by your own choice the frustration that you have chosen for yourself by saying, I don't want anything to do with God. Well, just because you have decided to do something that frustrates you, that doesn't mean it's not better to still be alive. We see that even in this life. People make stupid decisions, and sometimes their stupid decisions cause them frustration, but they still would rather be alive. which is why they don't kill themselves. And so if we see that happening in this life, where people can make stupid decisions that they can even cling to and say, oh, I wouldn't change that. Even though I know it's causing me frustration, I wouldn't change that. I still affirm what I did. Maybe because they're too proud to go back and change their mind about what they did. But they still affirm it, even though it's causing them pain and frustration, and they still want to be alive in spite of that pain and frustration. If we see that happening in this life, the same thing can happen in the next. You could have people who are lost, who have cut themselves off from God and say, oh, I'm glad I chose not to be with God. I don't want to be with him. And yes, it's causing me pain and frustration. And yes, I'm still glad that I exist. So just because you've made a decision that frustrates you, that doesn't mean you want to be annihilated.
Anna Maria, thank you. You can probably hear the music, so we have to take a quick break. Thank you for that question. It's Open Forum. Jimmy Akin, our guest. More right after this.
We're here for you. Call now. Catholic Answers Live.
Bishop Joseph Strickland of Tyler, Texas, is one of the most courageous leaders in the church, known for his outspoken support of unborn life, Orthodox faith and morals, and reforming Catholic institutions. In his groundbreaking new book, Light and Leaven, he offers a forthright perspective on the state of the church today and calls on the lay faithful to meet its challenges boldly. Touching on topics including parish renewal, the centrality of the Eucharist, the need for prayer and silence in a noisy and distracted age, and the battle between good and evil in the church and world, Bishop Strickland's wise insights and evident love for souls will inspire and edify you. To order your copy of Light and Leaven, visit shop.catholic.com today or ask for it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
Did you know you can access Catholic Answers Live right from your phone or other mobile device? Download the Catholic Answers Live app today. The Catholic Answers Live app, available now on iOS and Android.
To many people, even many Christians, purgatory is a fantasy, or worse, a wicked lie invented by the church to make salvation complicated and keep people in fear. But I'm here to tell you that purgatory is fact, not fiction. The Bible supports it, Christians have historically believed in it, and it makes theological sense. In my new book, Purgatory is for Real, I provide the evidence and reasoning to help you understand this controversial doctrine and demonstrate how it's actually a joyful, hopeful reality, not something shadowy and mysterious, but a sign of God's love and mercy. To get your copy of Purgatory is for Real, visit shop.catholic.com today or ask for it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
Sarah gave me the "why did you even doubt me" look on her face. Why did you even doubt me? Of course I'm going to do the groovy music. Nice job, Sarah. As always, that makes for Thursday. Jimmy Akin, groovy music, open forum, that makes for a really good Thursday. And you too, Sarah. You make for a good Thursday, too. The number here is 888-318-7884. It's a Thursday. It's open forum. Up next in Lafayette, Louisiana, Salvador, listening on 99.5 FM. Salvador, thank you so much for your call. Go ahead with your question for Jimmy.
Yes, sir. First of all, I'm so excited to be asking this to Mr. Jimmy Akin. I've heard a lot about him. And I'm so excited, and it's my pleasure to meet you, sir.
Likewise. The pleasure is all mine.
My question is about the soul and God. Mm-hmm. I grew up as a Catholic. I was baptized Catholic, and all my life I've been, I'm 47 years old right now. All my life I've been going to church, participating in Mass, and I was an altar server for 17 years. I participated as a lector and Eucharistic minister for couple years. I grew up in Abbeville, Louisiana. Now I live in Lafayette, Louisiana. And I started hearing that people would say in this New Age belief system that God is a consciousness, your soul is a consciousness. I believe that consciousness is created and we're not a consciousness. That's my question.
Okay, so in New Age circles these days, consciousness is kind of a buzzword, and I've never been able to get it really clear in my mind how folks who are affiliated with the New Age movement are using this term. If you listen to, for example, late night talk radio, there will be programs where they talk very excitedly about consciousness. And consciousness is an experience that we all have, at least when we're not, asleep or under anesthetic. We have consciousness, we have conscious experiences, and I'm not sure why, and I think it really varies from one individual to another what they're thinking about when they talk about consciousness. I think that oftentimes they are thinking of something different than just the regular concept of consciousness. Now, consciousness is currently the subject of scientific study. There are a variety of different types of scientists and related scholars who have been studying human consciousness and animal consciousness and trying to figure it out. And they've made progress kind of around the edges, but they haven't been able to figure out consciousness itself. This is known as the hard problem of consciousness, saying, well, what even is it? It's something we experience, and we know what it's like to experience consciousness. But if you try to break it down and say, well, why are things conscious and how does it all work? We don't have the first clue yet. We can only kind of nibble around the edges. In terms of the New Age presentation of consciousness, sometimes people will will be very interested in applications of consciousness to do interesting and unusual things, like things that would be considered psychic. So, for example, one of the things that is out there is known as the Global Consciousness Project. And what this is an experiment where you have a bunch of random number generators stationed. These are little computers. They're called eggs in this case, but you have these random number generators that are around the globe at different points, and they're constantly generating random numbers. And the idea is, can human consciousness affect the output of these random number generators? That would be a psychic ability called telekinesis or psychokinesis, influencing things at a distance. And so the idea behind the Global Consciousness Project is, well, maybe with all the human beings on Earth, maybe there's a kind of low-level telekinetic field around the Earth that could influence these random number generators, and then we could correlate the output. We could look for weird anomalies in the output of the random number generators and see, does that correlate with anything that's like in the news, that's going to be globally, that's in the mind of the public. And reportedly, they found some correlations. Like in 9/11, back in the year 2001, when the 9/11 attacks occurred, that was all over the news. That made an impact on the consciousness of millions and billions of people around the world. And the Global Consciousness Project people said, and we found a spike in the data coming out of the random number generators. And so they would say, it looks like maybe there's some evidence that consciousness can affect things like this. And so sometimes when the word consciousness gets used, I think it's being used as kind of a surrogate for, psychic paranormal stuff. But when it comes to human beings, now, one of the things I heard you mention, Salvador, was it sounded, our phone connection wasn't the best. It sounded like you said some people from the New Age will say things like, you are a consciousness. And that's something that has an element of truth in that we are conscious beings by nature. but it's an incomplete truth because we are also physical beings by nature. The Christian view of humanity is that our nature includes both a rational, mental, intellectual, conscious component and a physical component. And we're not complete if we have only one or the other. And that's why in the end our destiny is to be resurrected, so that our mind, our consciousness will be put back together with our body and will be whole and complete again. This is different than other races that God has created, like angels, who by nature are just intellects. They don't natively have a body. But the Christian faith holds that humans do, by nature, have a body. And so it wouldn't be accurate to say to a human being, you are a consciousness, implying that's all you are essentially, and a body is not also part of human nature.
Salvador, I'm going to say thanks for the call, and we'd love to send you a book. I'd love to send you Jimmy's book, A Daily Defense, because you're thinking about deep things, and there's 365 plus one different deep things to think about in that book. If you'd like to get the book, hang on the line. Marie will get your information, and we will send that to you. The number here is 888-318-7884, 888-318-7884. I'm Cy Kellett, your host. Jimmy Akin is our guest, and it is an open forum. I'm going to go now to Piedmont, South Dakota. Joshua, listening on Real Presence Radio. You are next, Joshua. Go ahead with your question for Jimmy.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Happy to.
So, a show that I watched recently it's Re:Zero. It's an anime, but basically the main premise of that is that every time he dies, he's taken back to a set point in time. So it's essentially a time loop that is only triggers whenever he dies.
It's like Groundhog Day.
And that got me to thinking. It has when I think about marriage, there's the whole "until death do us part," right? The promise. And when death happens, right? There's no marriage that exists past that. So it got me thinking: would marriage become invalid after you have died in the time loop, or would it still hold?
Okay, so it's an interesting question. It's going to depend on whether you really do die or not. Now, it would appear to me now if someone is just dead, permanently, really, truly, not just really dead, but really most sincerely dead. Then the bond of marriage ceases. And so if you get brought back to life after that, you're just not married anymore. And this is the case of normal human beings. Normal human beings, when you die and you're really, truly dead, and then at the second coming you get resurrected, you're not married anymore. But that's a different circumstance than what you have when someone is resurrection is a different circumstance than what you have when someone is resuscitated. So, for example, let's look at Lazarus. Well, Lazarus died, and 4 days later he was revived. So he wasn't brought back to a glorious state. He was brought back to a normal human condition. And let's suppose that Lazarus had been married. Well, in Lazarus's case, I would suggest that if he had been revived back to life, and had been married, he would have just gone on living with his wife, and everyone in the community and him and his wife would have regarded themselves as married, and that would be just fine. There would be no interruption in the marriage, even though he was biologically dead for 4 days. Now, one of the things, incidentally, about marriage that would have made that extra certain back in their day is you didn't have to have a church marriage or even a public marriage. You don't have to by natural law. Those are requirements that have been added by church law and civil law, but under natural law, it is possible to have a private marriage where you, and without even a ceremony, where there are cultures where two people just regard themselves as married and the community regards themselves as married, and legally and everything in every other way, they're married. So the requirement of like having a special ceremony in church, that's added not by natural law, but by church law and civil law. So if there was, let's say Lazarus is married, even if his marriage had dissolved by his 4-day death, he comes back, he regards himself as married to his wife regards herself as married to him, the community regards them as both married to each other, there's no need for a new ceremony, they're married. And so I would say that either the marriage would not be terminated by a temporary death, like a person today who might die for a few minutes or a few hours and then be brought back by defibrillation. Those people are regarded as still married to their spouses, and so I would say, using that as a parallel and using our married Lazarus as a parallel, I would say that if in the case of this time loop guy, if he dies and jumps back in time to a point where he had been married to a woman who had consented to marry him, I would say that marriage should be regarded as if it's valid, because under either of the scenarios I mentioned for Lazarus, he's jumping back to a place where she's agreed to marry him, he's agreed to marry her, they've both been the community regards them as being married, and so I would say that they should presume that they are married to each other.
Thanks, Joshua. Great question. Appreciate that. We got to take a quick break. Right back with more Open Forum with Jimmy Akin right after this.
Hang on. Catholic Answers Live will return in a moment.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Real Estate for Life. Real Estate for Life connects homebuyers and sellers to real estate agents while supporting pro-life organizations. On the web at realestateforlife.org.
Go forth and preach the good news. It's not just a suggestion. If you want to take more seriously the command of Jesus to share the gospel with those around you, consider joining St. Paul Street Evangelization. It's a grassroots organization that brings the Catholic faith to the streets in a non-confrontational way. Visit our website, www.streetevangelization.com, to learn more. And don't forget to like us on Facebook. It's time to do our part.
She is one of the most beloved saints of all time, honored as the Saint of the Little Way.
Matthew Bunsen and the Doctors of the Church.
Saint Thérèse of Lisieux entered the Carmelite convent of Lisieux in 1888 and survived only 9 more years. Still, her extraordinary holiness and prayer life prompted her superiors to have her write an autobiography, The Story of a Soul. It became a spiritual classic.
For more about the Doctors of the Church, visit doctorsofthechurch.com.
Welcome back. Catholic Answers Live. I am your top professional radio host, Cy Kellett. Jimmy Akin, our guest. You know, Jimmy, something from our childhood that I just don't think will probably ever happen again. You watch The Wizard of Oz once a year. It would come on the TV once a year.
Yeah. Well, why limit yourself to once a year when now there's streaming?
But you know what? This makes me feel weird, though, because you're slightly younger than I am, Jimmy, and it shows. But we were probably watching The Wizard of Oz at the same time because it was on the network.
We probably were.
Yeah. Wow. That makes me feel even closer to you, Jimmy. It was just you and me and 20 million other people watching The Wizard of Oz.
World.
After all. All right. Enough of reminiscing. Joe in Wisconsin, watching on YouTube Live. You are next. Joe, hang on. I got to make sure I got the right number here to push. Joe, go ahead with your question for Jimmy.
Hey. Hi. Yeah, thanks for taking my call. Big fan of Jimmy Akin. Did have a quick question just regarding the the Blessed Virgin as the co-redemptrix. I'm just curious if this is this considered a teaching of the church, a doctrine of the church? I know it's not dogma, because there's people trying to get it to be sort of dogma. I'm just sort of trying to figure out what that statement is. And I kind of always get confused going back and forth between the difference between doctrine and dogma in general.
Yeah.
Like, I get what dogma is when it's like declared.
Well, you got the right man. You got the right man here.
Let me sketch how these categories work. So teaching and doctrine are the same thing. The Latin word doctrina just is Latin for teaching, and so anything that the church authoritatively teaches is a doctrine. Doctrines can be taught with different levels of authority. The highest level of authority is infallibility, and so there within the set of doctrines, there's a smaller set of infallible doctrines. And within those infallible doctrines, the church may teach different things about them. For example, it might teach that something is divinely revealed. Or it might not. It may be something we know, something that's guaranteed to be true, even though it wasn't divinely revealed by God. So you've got a split among the infallible teachings between those that are divinely revealed and those the church hasn't said to be divinely revealed. If the church infallibly defines that a doctrine is divinely revealed, that's what a dogma is. So it's not sufficient that it be an infallible teaching. The church must say infallibly, God has revealed this. And that's when the church does that, that's a dogma. Now, in terms of the idea of Mary being co-redemptrix, I'm sure what I'm about to say is something that may not be popular with everybody, but it's straightforward, honest assessment of the data. Also, I should clarify what this means, because when people hear the term co-redemptrix, they think, oh, well, Christ is the Redeemer, and this is somehow making Mary equal to Jesus, like she redeemed us in the same way that Jesus did, and so, how would that work? That sounds really bad. And if that's what you mean, it is really bad. If that's what a person meant by co-redemptrix, it would be false, because Mary is not equal to Jesus. She did not redeem us the way Jesus did. But the word co, or the prefix co in English, can imply equality. And so that's why it sounds that way. The prefix co comes from the Latin preposition cum, and cum does not necessarily mean equal. It can just mean with, and that's the sense that's in play when Mary is under discussion with respect to the Redeemer. So she's not equal to Jesus, but she is a woman who cooperates with the Redeemer. She cooperates with God's plan and her son's role in it. So she, for example, when the angel Gabriel appears to her, she agrees to become the mother of the Messiah, the Redeemer, and thus, she's even told he will save his people from their sins. And so she willingly cooperates with the Redeemer, and in that sense, she could be described as someone who works with the Redeemer in a unique way by being his mom, and you could legitimately use the title for her in that sense. You could also use it for other people in other senses. All Christians who are doing their job as Christians are cooperating with the Redeemer in one way or another by living a Christian life and setting an example for other people and evangelizing them and telling them about Jesus and, doing corporal and spiritual works of mercy. All of those things, we cooperate with the Redeemer and his plan. So there's a sense in which all of us are co-redeemers in this little bitty way. In Mary's case, it's unique because she is the only one who's the mother of the Redeemer. So she has a unique form of working with the Redeemer. And so if that's all you mean is works with the Redeemer in some way, well, then you can use this language regarding Mary and even with other people. Now, what about its status in terms of church teaching? Well, historically, the term co-redemptrix has been used occasionally in various documents coming out of the magisterium. But it also has not been so used recently. The Second Vatican Council did not use it, and it has not been used recently. And you even have remarks from recent popes like Benedict XVI and Pope Francis saying that they don't think that this is the best title because they recognize some of the problems and difficulties it can create in people's understanding of it. Pope Benedict had, in an interview, had said, even as far back as the reign of John Paul II, but that he didn't think that there would be any action to make this a dogma, to proclaim this language a dogma. He's also said that he thinks that it's trying to compress too much into a single phrase and it becomes misleading, because a single phrase, people are going to latch onto the phrase and not properly understand everything that it implies or how it's being used and what it does not mean. Pope Francis has on more than one occasion distanced himself from the term. And so when you see, and I talk about this in my book, Teaching with Authority, where I also go into all these distinctions about dogma and doctrine and so forth, when you see the church ceasing to use something, and even people like popes distancing themselves from it, that's a sign that a particular thing is falling into what lawyers call desuetude. Desuetude means disuse. So in the law, there can be a law, but if it's never enforced, it falls into desuetude and ceases to be a law. And in the same way, for non-infallible teachings, this doesn't apply to the infallible ones, but for non-infallible teachings that the church has proposed, they can fall into desuetude and cease to be church teachings. An example of that would be the idea that tonsure, which is a special kind of haircut that priests would have, the clerics would have, the church in the 1500s taught that was of apostolic origin, that was an apostolic tradition. But by the 1900s, that had fallen into desuetude, and you had Catholic scholars saying, yeah, no, it really doesn't go back to the apostles. It's a later development than that. And so that was never an infallible teaching, and later evidence shed more light on it, and it fell into desuetude and ceased to be a church teaching. Limbo is another idea. Limbo is no longer a church teaching. It's now a permitted theological opinion. And so I would say, by watching the pattern of what's happened with co-redemptrix, it is no longer being treated by the magisterium as an authoritative expression of Catholic doctrine. Now, the truths about Mary still being someone who cooperated uniquely with the Redeemer, that's all still true. Just like it's true that all of us cooperate with the Redeemer in various ways. But as a privileged and authoritative expression of Catholic teaching, it looks to me like co-redemptrix has fallen into desuetude if you have popes saying, I don't think we should use this expression. Now, that could change with a future pope, might have a different opinion, might revive it. But that's my assessment of the current status of this phrase vis-a-vis authoritative teaching.
Thanks, Joe. Jimmy, because there's very little time, an anonymous caller has this question. I'm just going to read it to you real quickly.
Okay.
If there's a faithful Catholic with a terminal illness and that person's at peace with dying, should we stop praying for that person's healing?
I would say that it is something, it's certainly legitimate to do that, to just say, God, please help this person as they make their transition and come to you. On the other hand, it can be legitimate to say, Father, if it's your will, I'd love to see this person recover and have a miraculous healing and recapture their joy of living and live some more and do more good in the world. So I wouldn't say that you're obligated to do one over the other. It's permissible to do both, and ultimately it's all in God's hands. And so just saying, God, please help this person in whatever way is best, is always a legitimate prayer.
Thank you, Anonymous. Sorry we weren't able to get you on the air. Thank you, Sarah. Great job doing the sound. Zach, you did a good job on the video, I assume. I didn't get to see very much of it. I'm just assuming you did a good job. Thanks, Marie. Appreciate all that call screening. Jimmy Akin has been our guest. He's senior apologist here at Catholic Answers. Thanks, Jimmy, for 2 great hours.
My pleasure, anytime.
And I got to say, I think I really did a top professional job today. So I'm just going to leave it there. We'll see you tomorrow, God willing, on Catholic Answers Live.